you don't have to choose. This phrase was ringing in my head over and over and over again when I woke up this morning, and I couldn't help but have the urge to record and see what comes through. I've really set the intention that anything I'm going to say is just going to be what is meant to come through me. So I have no idea where this is going to go, but I feel like in life, we're always presented with a set of choices. I feel like in life, we always kind of, because we are creators at the core, our attention is what creates our reality. So whatever we give our minds to, whatever we give our time to, whatever we focus on will just expand naturally. Like whatever you're doing, you start to do more of, you start to do more of, you start to do more of. And in the process of doing that, you're creating a set reality based on all the things and habits that you formed over time. So because of that realization, I'd felt for a really long time that if I wanted to pursue a set reality, I had to choose that reality over other realities. I had to choose, like if I wanted to do one thing, I had to pick it over something else, and that meant sacrificing something else that I may have wanted. So it's like if there's like different forms of, let's say, hobbies that I want to be pursuing, but I only have so much time in a day, I did not feel like it was possible. I did not feel like it was possible for me to make all of them goals. I would always find myself saying things like, okay, like, but I only have so much time. What am I going to make a priority? And while I think priorities are important because they make you realize your own values, I think what you prioritize will really relate to you, what your values are. Like whatever you prioritize in your life is going to show you the kind of person you are, and is going to show you what it is that you stand for. And I think what you stand for is going to relate your purpose. So whatever your purpose is, it's going to be the core of anything else that you decide to do. Like it is going to be the heart of your passions. It's going to be the heart of whatever you choose to make your center of focus. So it's very important to know your whys, and I think that's why it's very important to know your priorities. But I think that sometimes we start to feel like we need to prioritize something that we want over something else we want. Another thing is, like, I don't feel like I don't feel like a lot of us are very connected to our wants. I think a lot of us are very connected to our needs. I think a lot of us are very connected to the idea that we need to survive. I think a lot of us are very connected to the fact that if I don't go to work today, I'm not going to make an income. I'm not going to have food on the table. I'm not going to be able, like, I'll probably die. And I think that is what drives our everyday behavior. Like, a lot of times I see so many people, and like, even sometimes, like, I've caught myself in these, like, I guess, like, limited mindsets of like, okay, I have to do this because it's the only way to survive. And I think what that does, while it's important to know your needs so you can tend to them, I think that what that does is it's constantly feeding a fear-based mentality, and it's also constantly feeding the idea that, like, we have to live for what we need and we're not worthy of what we want because we need to shrink ourselves into being satisfied with what we need. But I think that once you surpass that and you start to, like, lean into and trust the idea that you will always have what you need because that's a bare minimum, and that's a bare minimum that has, like, gotten you to the place of you surviving to this very point right now, you start to feel safer. Like, you start to condition your brain to feel safer to ask for things that it actually wants. And I think when you're asking for things that you actually want, then you're entering a mindset of abundance. Like, then you're entering a mindset of being like, okay, I am truly living for life to the fullest extent that I could say. If I looked back, I made the most of my time. And where was I going with this? I feel like because a lot of people are not connected to their wants, they don't actively take the time to realize their wants can also be a priority. They don't actively take the time to give their wants their attention. And when you're not giving your wants your attention, what starts to happen is you start to live every single day, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, doing the things that you need to do, but feeling less and less and less, or I guess more and more and more lackluster. You start to feel like this is all there is to life. And, like, we just kind of have to make ends meet. But there's always going to be this, like, emptiness that kind of follows you, because you feel like in order to make ends meet, in order to survive, you've had to sacrifice everything that gives you joy. You've had to sacrifice the version of you that wants to play. You've had to sacrifice the version of you that wants pleasure. You've had to sacrifice the version of you that wants to feel excitement. You've had to sacrifice the version of you that wants to feel like there's more to live for than just surviving. And yeah, so something that really hit me, because I've also found myself in this mindset of being like, okay, I know this is something I want, and this is something I want, and this is something I want, and this is something I want, but I have to choose. Because at the end of the day, I only have 24 hours in a day, and that's all I can do. But I just got this download this morning that like I don't feel like that's on an energetic level how it works. I think the fact that we feel like we have to choose is what makes us feel like we have to choose, which is what makes us choose. I think that is also us creating the reality where we have limited options. But I feel like what I'm being pulled to and what I'm being inspired to do recently is like to realize that like even the time that we feel that we have is so limited, time is also a creation. Like time is also a human construct. Like we created time. That space, that point in space is also our creation. Even if you start to play with your own perception of time, like sometimes when you're so immersed in an activity, like sometimes when you're so deep and you're so immersed, like you could be meditating, you could be like intentionally writing, whatever it is, like a moment where everything is flowing, all of a sudden time seems to move really slowly and everything feels like it's within reach. But when you're experiencing like an overwhelm of stimulation and you're out of your flow state, all of a sudden time starts to feel like you can't keep up with it. And a day feels like an hour, but sometimes a minute can feel like an hour. And it just depends on like the state of mind that you're in. So it's also your attention that is creating how vast the space and time that you are in is. So I started to realize like, if I want to be pursuing all of these things, I'm not going to start at the place where I have to decide, okay, I only have this much time in a day. Because the more I say to myself, I only have this much time in a day, I only have this much time in a day, the word only is such a limited, it's such a limited specification. And I find like the more specific we are with our words, the more we can be intentional with what we're trying to create. But I feel like there's so many words that we say to ourselves over and over and over again to create the reality that we're living in, and it does not have to be the case. Because instead of being like, oh, I only have so much time in a day, I could be like, whoa, I have 24 hours in a day. Like that's a lot of time. Like most tasks take like an hour or 2 hours, and it really depends on like how centered you are as you're doing them. So it's like once you start to play with the idea of time and start to realize like you're also creating the vastness of time or the shallowness of time based on like based on like what you're feeding yourself constantly. And then you start to realize that everything is possible. So instead of looking at all these timelines as separate and feeling like you have to decide between them, all you have to do is you have to create the space for both timelines to exist at the same time, in the same space. So it's like, if I were to take this back from like a theoretical explanation or like if I were to take this back from a theoretical way of explaining this, and I were to put it into like a more practical perspective, it's kind of like, do you ever feel like sometimes you just like are so consumed, you're so busy, you don't have time for anything, or you're like barely making time for anything, but all of a sudden something comes up out of nowhere and you have an intuitive pull to do it, you have the impulse to go do it, and suddenly you can carve out that 1 hour in your day to go and make it work. Suddenly you're like, okay, I normally don't have time for anything or anyone, but I can make space for this. And it's the moment that you decided to make space for this, the 15 minutes you had between leaving one place and going to the next is valuable time. So it's like that space, when you zoom out of like trying to look at it in a more practical way, energetically that is how things work too. Reality in and of itself collapses into the way that you're observing it. And there's literally proof of this, like light particles. I said light particles. I remember reading something that was like an experiment, and it's like particles literally exist as photons or waves. And I think it exists as a wave until we observe it, and then it crystallizes into the timeline that like we are observing it through. So it crystallizes into the fixed state of how we're seeing it. So literally particles are shifting themselves as we watch them. So it's like truly like when you want to change how much can fit into your day and how much can fit into your time, you have to start looking at things like, I have a lot of time. There's no reason for me to choose because everything is within reach. There's no reason for me to choose because I can have this and I can have that. I can make time for this and I can make time for that. And what you need to start to do is you just need to like bridge that gap. Like you need to figure out the gap between where you are, what you want, and what is hindering you from going here to here. And when you can find the space where both realities that you're trying to go for, although they seem contradicting, can interact, because everything interacts. Like literally every single thing that we can experience in our consciousness, it's quantumly entangled. Like there's this thing called quantum entanglement. So it's like the moment two things interact, there is a world where they exist together. The moment you interact with something, there is a world where you exist together. And that, no matter how distant you get from that space or that thing that you interacted with, that is the, I'm struggling to find the words to explain this in the way that it makes sense in my head. So just give me a second. So it's like even the fact that you've thought of one thing and you've thought of another thing, that is those two things being connected through you. And you being the thing that is like the center of these two other things, you've now entangled them with each other. So now that you've entangled them with each other, particles have this quality called quantum, like they are quantumly entangled once they've interacted. So it's like no matter how distant these things get, no matter how long it's been since you've looked at this reality or that reality, or no matter how long it's been that you've pushed these together, they start to mimic each other. They start to exist in a cohesive world where they are creating a space for them to intertwine, no matter how far apart this energy is. So when you actively take that time to pull these worlds together and exist and create a world where both can simultaneously exist, if you can actively create the space for both your realities to come together and exist in that and observe that, you're going to be cementing into your current reality. So yeah, I feel like I jumbled my words a little bit, but I feel like this was like my best effort at like putting my thoughts into words. Like I'm realizing like, okay, we really don't have to choose. We truly don't have to decide what it is that we want. We just have to find the space where both the things we want can interact and observe that space into our reality. So yeah.